It is utterly terrifying to confront the notion that this is my 40th year in Vienna doing things with IIASA. I was indeed, I think, its first or second graduate student, which shows that small diversions at crucial phases in one's life actually make a huge difference. I came here as one of Buzz Holling's bug squeezers and encountered such a range of exciting people coming at complicated, interesting problems at the interface of what people were doing to improve their lives, what the world was experiencing as a result of that, well, life has never been the same since. So what I was asked to do was give a retrospect prospect on the kinds of contributions that science and scientists have made to looking at the interactions between people trying to better their lives, but the increasing recognition that doing that on a limited planet has perils as well as all sorts of possibilities in it. I will try to do that in the face of the amazing shrinking time spans that have been allocated to us with, the bait was come here and talk for, 22 hours. By the time we got here, it was down to 8 minutes, 6 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever. So this will be condensed. All the things that are left out, I of course would have said if I had had more time. So the first piece is obviously that is as ancient as IIASA is, work by the scientific community to bring the insights and potential of science to bear on issues of how people used the environment is nothing new. It's been going on since people tried to think how many crop rotations you needed or how many fish you could take out of the pond, and so on and so on. On the international stage, at least from my perspective as a one-time biologist, the effort began to really take form in the World Conservation Strategy published in the early 1980s. Many of the conservation organizations at the time finally dawning on them that you couldn't advance conservation goals by merely thinking about panda bears. You had to think about the people who were inhabiting the same parts of the world and trying to eke a living out of it. And they began the call for getting serious about studying what humans needed from systems as well as what pandas wanted. By the time we rolled forward through the Brundtland Commission on Sustainable Development up into Agenda 21, which was the big scientific sort of roadmap that emerged from the first Rio conference on environment and development. And then, of course, today we have the venture that Johan Rockström and Diana Liverman have both talked about earlier today, which is a renewed commitment of the scientific community to bring what it's got to bear on these issues of how to improve human lives on a finite planet. So it's been around a long time. What has it accomplished? The point is, it certainly is a lot bigger than it used to be. This is an analysis by Bettencourt and his colleagues just last year of a scientometric study of simply the publication patterns in people wrestling with the sustainable development issue in the scientific literature. And what it shows is that when IIASA was founded, it isn't quite that nobody was doing work in this field, but there wasn't anything approaching a community of people looking at joint human-environment interactions as a sustained scientific research program. There were certainly individuals doing parts, there were applied fields in agriculture, in energy, and so on, but there was not a community in any sense of the word. The interesting thing is Bettencourt and company point out, using some fairly sophisticated sort of population modeling techniques, that the crucial period in the evolution of this field was in fact in the 1980s, when the first big contagions happened of the different island empires of people studying energy and agriculture and complex systems and system dynamics finally began to come together. I said, well, gee, that's funny. I look around this room and I see a bunch of people who in the 1980s were indeed here in Austria at IIASA. This is the time that the food program grew up and the water program grew up and the population program really took form, and so on as an incubator, a place where quite aside from the individual papers that came out, a whole community that, as I look out at this audience, has gotten a lot older, but is connected in ways that a classic disciplinary upbringing didn't allow to. That field grew on. By the time the Brundtland Commission was actually doing its work in the mid-'80s, there was beginning to be a scientific literature relevant to its work, though not particularly used in that study. And the Bettencourt analysis says that then around the turn of the millennium, the field really gelled in the sense not only of being bigger, but in the sense that at maybe one remove, everyone in the field knew about everyone else. Papers were citing each other. You didn't have to go far before reading in any journal on this topic. You would be reading the papers. You'd be seeing the citations to papers working elsewhere in the field. So since around 2000, the field that IIASA was playing this contagion role in back in the 80s has been there. And we've had a field. Many people have dubbed this field sustainability science, describing it as an emerging field of use-inspired, that is problem-driven research. Not something new under the sun. Just like agricultural research, agricultural science and health science in their day emerged not as wholly new phenomena, but rather as coming together of, if I take the agriculture example, plant physiologists, geneticists, agricultural economists, and so on, who at night would go back home to their home disciplines, but as part of their day job found themselves increasingly interacting with one another and eventually finding it useful to have journals and professional societies and so on that honored those interactions as well as the disciplinary foundations they came out of. In this case, defined by the practical problems it faces, not agriculture or health, but in this case, sustainable development. Conducted by drawing opportunistically from whatever science is out there in the engineering community, the medical community, the natural and social sciences, and with a pretty deep commitment to linking that knowledge with action. That is, to noting you don't sit there in your cell, even the beautiful cells of Luxembourg, and figure these issues out. You figure out a next step, you try it in the world, you see what the world does, and come back. So what I'm going to do is try in, 4 slides, to say, so in this 40-year trajectory, but especially the last 10 years, what have been the big findings and what are the remaining challenges facing this emergent field of sustainability science? So I'll do a slide each on how have we changed our view of what's the problem, what kind of systems we're investigating, what kind of institutions are appropriate for managing or bringing some control to those systems, and then what is indeed the role of science as opposed to other social forces and activities in addressing and supporting such management. So what's the problem? At risk of getting run out of here on a rail, the Brundtland Commission, of course, back in the mid-'80s laid out a very powerful political framing of the challenge of sustainable development, meeting the needs of the present while not endangering the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. There's been a great bleat going on from certain corners of the academic world for years that if you couldn't measure it, it really didn't mean anything. Those of us in the trade have responded like justice and democracy and other important ideas. But the point is the field has advanced, and today there are multiple formalization and framings, none of which are the whole story, but have begun to be self-contained and therefore critiquable stories that let science advance. The one I'm talking about here is one that grounds the study of sustainability in human well-being, defined in an aggregate sense, intergenerationally and intragenerationally, weighing the rights of future people and present people in ways that you determine according to your own preferences and so on. The right-hand side defined crucially in terms of stocks or assets, difference from, say, GNP accounting, which is a flow, and can tell you a lot about your current well-being, but tells you nothing about how sustainable that well-being is into the future. So in this case, not surprisingly, and echoing lots of themes we've heard today, the basic capital assets of the ones we've always heard about, manufactured capital, our energy systems, our urban systems, our transport systems, and how polluting they are. Second is our human capital, which I guess there was a lot of talk on yesterday. Population, its health, its education, its ability to actually reflect on the central dilemmas of sustainability. And then natural capital, the thing that had been for so many years left out of these calculuses, but in which increasingly we see being folded into accounts of how well a country is doing. Those tangible capital assets in the modern view of sustainability science, modulated by the institutions we have, the laws, norms, rules, and expectations, highly trustworthy governance operations versus highly corrupt ones, so forth and so on, and then the knowledge, scientific, practical, our ability to innovate. And the challenge before us then is within frameworks like this and its alternatives to say, if that's the way we thought about sustainability, first, which part of that puzzle, just the energy system, just the agricultural system, just the institutions am I dealing with? And how does that relate to the other parts of it? But then crucially, how do we actually begin to do systematic measurements and evaluations of sustainability in these alternative worlds? What kind of a system is this thing we're doing? How would you actually do the computations? Well, what we've learned is there are certainly complex systems, not just in the descriptive, but in the technical sense of the word. They're interdependent. The manufactured capital and the natural capital and the human capital are interdependent on one another, a coupled set of differential equations, if you want. They're operating at multiple scales from local to global, and there's enough nonlinearity in these systems that they're contagious across those fields. They're adaptive because there are selection mechanisms by which what works locally spreads in one form or another to be contagious across the system as a whole. There aren't master controllers. As I say, they're highly nonlinear. The work of Buzz Holling and others here at IIASA pushed us to look at the implications of discontinuities, multiple equilibria, the kind of path dependence issues that Brian Arthur, during his time here at IIASA, brought into the economic debates. And the challenge before us is then how we design interventions that advance the transitions to sustainability that were so much a talk yesterday, but recognizing the systems we're trying to change are these complex, adaptive, nonlinear ones, which is a radical difference from simply saying, I want to be on a different trajectory from some masterminding perspective. What have we learned about the kinds of institutions you need for promoting such transitions? First, to use the late Lynn Ostrom's phrase, there are no panaceas. It's not markets, it's not control, it's not whatever you want to label as the one way to do this stuff. Whatever else we know is that the governance systems that work better are multi-level. You are doing some things locally, you are reserving the capacity to set certain rules at a higher level to allow collective actions and so on. So one has to think about the complex problems of multi-level governance. And with all deference to adaptive management and how important it is, a world in which everything is adaptive and nothing is fixed and predictable is one in which getting investment in the kinds of long-term institutions, buildings, and technical innovation we need is not possible. So it's to get beyond the mantras of just adaptive management or no adaptive management into a world where we cleverly, more clever than we usually do, balance the two of those, stable incentives and yet an ability to adapt. What we need and have done surprisingly little in is designing the feedback systems, the monitoring, measuring systems appreciatable by businesses, by scientists, by the public at large that tell us how we're doing in this complex adaptive system, which we're never going to design perfectly, and doing performance evaluations of different ones of these governance structures. Finally, what's the role for science in all of this, given we're at a conference from science to policy? Well, it's not from science to policy. Sorry, IIASA. If we have learned one thing, at least outside of IIASA, over the last 40 years, the notion that science figures it out and then tells society what to do, which is not far from the original founding mantra of IIASA. We just know that is wrong on so many levels. Like first, it doesn't work. Second, it probably isn't defensible, and so on and so on. Second, it's knowledge, not just science. Scientific knowledge, yes, but combined with local experiential knowledge, the kind of knowledge somebody who knows how to operate a cracking plant has, or knows how to operate a drought-laden agricultural establishment, integrating not just in practical context, but in ideas of quality control, what we do with the practical knowledge of a farmer and the statistical regressions of a group of our kin to make the knowledge on which we base the next step in sustainability. Linking, I come back to, it is not just transfer to the great unwashed what we, the experts, have discovered. It is recognizing that if people are going to act on knowledge that really affects their lives and livelihood, they have to trust it. To trust it, we have got evidence after evidence after evidence. It has to have been, in some sense, collaboratively produced. It doesn't mean every single discovery has to be made with a farmer in the trenches with the researcher. It does mean that if these are to guide people's lives and livelihoods, people have to be vested in the process that gives rise to it and feel that it has taken their notions of evidence and proof and demonstration credibly. And action, as opposed to policy. We got lots of policies out there about protecting the environment and promoting sustainability and so on and so on. And those aren't bad, but they can't be an end in themselves. The end in itself is action that actually transforms the game. And so I would, with respect, argue that for IIASA looking ahead, the argument is to think how we actually do science and innovation in support of sustainability that changes action on the ground in businesses, in governments, in civil society. Some of that will mean changes in policy, but there is vastly more than changes in policy that we have to be targeted at. The challenge then is to provide support for people in those decision-making positions, not instructions as to what they should do. And the work of Lane Hordijk and his group in the Acid Rain program here still remains as my demonstration of how you do that. So, the summary challenges, this is what I've just laid out in each of the former slides. I think there is a gratifying amount of progress when I look back to what we were doing in 1972, when we all blithely set out to be systems analysts to save the world. But there is a huge amount undone. The crucial things that are undone is we have learned more about the nature of the problem than we are actually managing to bring into practice in the research programs we now push and fund. And so I would end with the last line here. We need to figure out how to reward people like ourselves and our students, and especially our young colleagues, for engaging in the kinds of science and technology for sustainability that we've all been talking about today, rather than penalize them for the fact that they've strayed beyond the established disciplines, that what they're doing is mixing with actual practitioners and non-scientists in the field, and we make life dreadful for most of those folks today. We drive them away from academia, and we have a major set of reforms, certainly within institutions like my own, but even in pathbreakers like IIASA. So I look forward to signing into whatever the website is that'll let me do the 80th celebration of IIASA and see what you've done with these opportunities. Thank you.